I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I am an unpleasant man. Dostoevsky presented a nameless character in one of his short novels, Notes from Underground, an underground man who becomes almost a mirror of the modern mind, a person trapped in overthinking. His self-awareness, rather than offering clarity, becomes a source of torment. He is someone who wants to find meaning in his life, but in the end, just accepts nihilism as his life's philosophy and starts to live like a mouse in a corner. Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground stands as a counter to Nikolai Chernyshevsky's What is to be Done, which advocates a utopia based on the so-called natural laws of self-interest. Chernyshevsky's vision was rooted in scientism and rationalism, yet Dostoevsky saw in this vision a grave danger. To him, the rationalist ideas behind utilitarianism, socialism, and scientific determinism were gateways to a fatalistic worldview. In Dostoevsky's eyes, this path, if pursued, ultimately leads to nihilism, a belief in nothing, a void of meaning. He saw nihilism not as a philosophical stance, but as a destructive force, particularly hazardous for young minds, and one that is prevalent in modern times. For Dostoevsky, this rise of nihilistic thinking risked a profound moral and spiritual decay, a theme that might be the root cause of all unhappiness and emptiness in modern minds. So, let's discuss what Dostoevsky has shown as the reasons for all this intellectual chaos through his character, the underground man. The chaos of intellectual superiority. Dostoevsky's underground man is a masterclass in showing how intellectual arrogance can turn a person into their own worst enemy. This is a man who prides himself on being smarter, more aware, and more reflective than the so-called active people around him. But this so-called superiority doesn't elevate him. It traps him in a cycle of overthinking, bitterness, and inaction, which he admits himself. Dostoevsky gives us a character who believes his hyper-awareness makes him somehow superior to others, but it only leads to chaos in his life. The underground man sees himself as too enlightened to participate in the mundane world. He refuses to take responsibility, brushing off anything practical or routine as beneath him. Whether it's his government job or his personal relationships, he avoids taking action because he believes action is for the stupid. Those who don't stop to overthink everything, those who just do, are fools in his eyes. And yet, these fools are the ones who actually accomplish something. Meanwhile, the underground man sits in his dark, isolated corner, tearing apart the world with his thoughts but never engaging with it. This overthinking and detachment somehow remind me of what Friedrich Nietzsche warned us about. Nietzsche critiqued the overly rational approach of Socratic philosophy, arguing that humans rely too much on their minds and not enough on their instincts. He believed that overanalyzing life drains the vitality out of it, leaving people paralyzed, exactly what happens to the underground man. Nietzsche's idea of embracing instincts wasn't about recklessness, but about trusting the natural primal drives that propel us forward. According to him, there's a raw power in taking action without dissecting every possible outcome beforehand. The underground man represents the exact opposite. He doesn't idolize overthinking, but he believes that it is what it is. He believes that questioning everything makes him superior, and his consciousness is what makes him enjoy the little details in life that others can't. He mocks the so-called active man, who doesn't bother to reflect deeply on their actions. But Dostoevsky shows us the cost of this mindset. While the active man might not pause to philosophize, they achieve something, whether good or bad, because they act. The underground man, on the other hand, spends his life sitting on the sidelines, criticizing and deconstructing everything but contributing nothing. The constant rationalizing kills any chance of real living. By rejecting instincts in favor of endless analysis, the underground man becomes a prisoner of his mind. He sabotages his own happiness, isolates himself from others, and eventually grows to hate not only the world but also himself. His refusal to engage with life practically is what leads to his misery, not his intellect, but the way he uses it to avoid responsibility. Dostoevsky shows us that too much consciousness, too much thinking, can be just as destructive as ignorance. Life requires balance. It means knowing when to stop overthinking and start doing. The underground man is the perfect example of what happens when someone loses that balance. He's not free, not enlightened. He's stuck, a chaotic mess of his own making. And that's a lesson worth keeping in mind. Sometimes the most intelligent thing you can do is act. Now, there's a whole new concept regarding action, which seems to be one of the main points Dostoevsky was raising against free will and utilitarianism. Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground is a powerful critique of utilitarianism and rational egoism, ideas promoted by thinkers like Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, and Nikolai Chernyshevsky. Utilitarianism argues that human behavior is guided by the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, while Chernyshevsky's rational egoism claims that all actions, even seemingly altruistic ones, are driven by self-interest. He envisions a society where rationality and utility govern morality, leading to social harmony and happiness. Through The Underground Man, Dostoevsky dismantles this deterministic and utilitarian worldview. The underground man, chaotic and hyperconscious, argues that reducing humans to predictable, utility-seeking agents denies the complexity of free will. For him, true freedom lies in the ability to act irrationally, unpredictably, and even self-destructively, acts that utilitarian logic cannot explain. He believes free will is the essence of being human, and to live by pure reason alone is to sacrifice individuality and the richness of life. The underground man mocks the idea of a perfectly rational society, suggesting that people will defy logic and utility simply to assert their autonomy. He asserts that even when individuals know what is best for them, they may choose otherwise purely to feel free. This is a rebellion against the utilitarian framework, which he sees as a system that enslaves people to the pursuit of efficiency, comfort, and predictable outcomes. Free will for the underground man is more than the ability to choose. It is the rejection of a life dictated by external laws or preordained systems. He values the chaos and contradictions of human existence because they affirm individuality and the unpredictable nature of life. In this way, Dostoevsky warns against the dangers of reducing humanity to mechanical calculations, where choice and personal agency are minimized. Ultimately, the underground man's defiance illustrates the existential struggle for meaning and autonomy. He champions the messy, irrational aspects of human nature, reminding us that free will is not about making the right choices, but about having the power to make choices at all, even if they lead to pain, conflict, or failure. This makes Notes from Underground a timeless critique of deterministic ideologies and a celebration of the unpredictable free spirit of humanity. This critique by the underground man makes him seem like an anti-nihilist, but he was more complicated than that. For most of the novel, he was too dead inside and seemed like a nihilist character. On the other hand, it's Dostoevsky's novel, so yes, there would be nihilism. Nihilism, I tell you. Solemnly, I have tried many times to become an insect, but I was not equal even to that. I swear, gentlemen, that to be too conscious is an illness, a real, thoroughgoing illness. The protagonist was a government officer who despised his job. He continued working there solely because he needed money to eat and cover basic necessities. After the death of a relative, he inherited some wealth, which meant he no longer had to work. He had no friends or close relationships, so he decided to live alone in a small, grimy apartment in St. Petersburg, Russia. Hopelessness consumed him, and he began to take pleasure in the isolation of his underground apartment. He didn't see himself as an honorable person, which led him to a stage of nihilism where people often fall into depression and believe they are insignificant. He abandoned his somewhat busy life to wallow in despair, overthinking in his small apartment. He admitted that he had failed to make something of himself and now felt that he wasn't even worth the life of an insect. To him, he was just a speck in the corner of his room. He recognized that something was wrong with his liver but refused to seek medical help, knowing it would worsen his condition. While he respected medicine and doctors, his refusal to treat himself stemmed from a deep, irrational defiance, a form of self-punishment. Although he understood his actions were harmful only to himself, he intentionally let his illness worsen, symbolizing his internal struggle and the slow decay of his spirit. The underground man represented a state of profound disillusionment, isolation, and self-destructive introspection that resonates with issues many people face today. Like him, many feel disconnected from the purpose of their work or education, merely going through the motions without any true fulfillment, often driven by economic pressures. With few genuine connections or social support, they retreat into their own underground, whether through social media, isolation, or unhealthy coping mechanisms. Just as the underground man refuses to seek help for his health problems out of spite, some avoid addressing their mental health issues or seeking help due to mistrust, pride, or despair. This self-destructive, nihilistic mindset arises when life feels purposeless, or when the world seems indifferent to personal struggles, leaving people to enjoy despair in lonely, introspective spaces. His story serves as a warning against letting cynicism and hopelessness lead to isolation and detachment from life's possibilities, a challenge that remains highly relevant today. Is modern man a coward? The underground man embodies emotional and moral cowardice. While he prides himself on his intellectual superiority, his life is characterized by avoidance, inaction, and fear. He refuses to confront challenges or take responsibility for his choices, retreating instead into bitterness and overthinking. This makes him a deeply contradictory figure, someone who claims to disdain others while secretly craving their validation and connection. This cowardice is evident in his failed interactions with others. At a farewell dinner for his old schoolmates, he invites himself, determined to assert some form of relevance. Yet, instead of speaking up or engaging, he remains awkwardly silent, nurturing fantasies of revenge when they inevitably ignore him. He builds grand schemes of confrontation in his mind but never acts on them. His fear of rejection and humiliation paralyzes him, leaving him resentful and filled with self-loathing. His encounter with Liza, a prostitute, further reveals his inability to act with sincerity or courage. Seeking her out after the humiliation at the party, he uses her as a means to restore his wounded ego. Pretending to care about her plight, he lectures her about the degradation of her life, offering hollow promises of salvation. However, when she responds with vulnerability, revealing her trust in him, he panics. Rather than taking responsibility for his words or actions, he lashes out, ultimately pushing her away and deepening his own sense of failure. At the heart of the underground man's paralysis is his obsession with overthinking. Every decision, every interaction, is endlessly dissected in his mind until action becomes impossible. This constant analysis, which he views as a mark of intellectual depth, becomes a prison. He is trapped by his own mind, unable to move forward. This refusal to confront life resonates deeply with the struggles of modern individuals. In an age of information overload, many people, like the underground man, find themselves paralyzed by self-doubt and fear of failure. Overthinking becomes a shield against the discomfort of taking risks or facing rejection, but it ultimately leads to stagnation. The underground man, by rejecting instinct and avoiding challenges, misses the essence of life itself: struggle, uncertainty, and growth. His bitterness and hatred for others are, at their core, projections of his own inadequacies.